I'm in the 12th chapter of Matthew. If you'd join me there, I would greatly appreciate it. The 12th chapter of the book of Matthew. You realize this morning without a shadow of a doubt that God is in fact listening to your heart. He's not looking at your life. He's not looking at the externals. He's not looking at what you do and how you do it. Only after which He has analyzed and inspected what is on the inside. He's looking at your heart. Matthew chapter 12 and verse 1, the Bible says, and at that time. At what time? Well, if you go back to Matthew chapter 11 and the 25th verse, you find the same words. And at that time. At what time? Well, it's in fact at the time when Jesus was speaking about this idea of invitation. We're in the middle of a series on the fact that the invitation is open. And we come to the matter this morning to discuss the fact that invitation is about living life. That we are in fact inviting people by the way we live. Did you hear the Bible reading from James chapter 3 when James talks about the power of the mouth, the power of the tongue? And in so expressing the danger of the tongue, he's also expressing the powerful nature of godliness that lies within the tongue. Of course, it is a deadly force, and it is only by God's help that we can tame it, but recognize that it is out of the heart from which it flows. What comes from the mouth starts within the heart. As Jesus is teaching in Matthew chapter 11, as He closes the chapter and He says, come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden. It's at that time, verse 1 of chapter 12, that He begins then to address the Pharisees. The Pharisees are growing from bad to worse. I'm not sure we could ever call them good, but they're growing from bad to worse, and now they're leading some Jews away, and they're doing so by their man-made traditions, specifically revolving around the Sabbath. And so Jesus spends the first part of Matthew chapter 12 saying, hey, listen guys, you're keeping a bunch of man-made traditions that absolutely honor God in no way at this point. You are in fact criticizing and being hypocritical of the commandments that God has made by so putting in your man-made traditions, among which the Pharisees are holding tooth and nail, making sure that every T is crossed and every I is dotted. And Jesus is saying, listen, so what that you cross every T and dot every I? It's only external. There is nothing internal. And before God looks at anything external, He examines what's on the inside. It's in that context of Matthew chapter 12 then, where the Pharisees are growing from bad to worse. They're leading Jews away to the point that at the end of the chapter, they're accusing Jesus, and they even to the point that they want to kill Him. Jesus comes along in Matthew 12 and verse 33, and He says, either make the tree good and its fruit good, or make the tree bad and its fruit bad, for the tree is known by its fruit. You brood of vipers, how can you speak good when you're evil? For out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks. The good person out of the good treasure brings forth good, and the evil person out of the evil treasure brings forth evil. I tell you, verse 36, on the day of judgment people will give an account for every careless word they speak, for by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. It's from that context this morning I ask this question. What kind of tree will you be? What kind of tree will you be? There was a soldier in the army of Alexander the Great, and he was being accused of acting like a coward. And he was brought before Alexander the Great to be judged. And Alexander the Great, before he ever asked him what these accusations were, he says to him, "What is your name?" And the soldier says, And again Alexander the Great says, "What did you say?" And he says a little bit louder, "Alexander." And for the third time, Alexander the Great says, "Soldier, what is your name?" To which this time he says, "Alexander." And Alexander says, the Great says to him, "Either you change your name or you change your actions." I'm asking you this morning, do we need a name change or do we need an action change? In other words, are you claiming to be a tree that's good, that's in fact not? Are you claiming to be something you're not? And you either need to change your name and quit claiming to be a Christian, or you need to change your actions and live up to be the tree that God wants you to be. What kind of tree will you be? In Matthew chapter 12 and verse 33, the first word in the English Standard Version, which is the first word in most translations, is either. Either. Either implies to me that there's a choice here. Either implies to me that there are at least two options. Either you'll do this or you'll do that. At least two options, maybe more, but on this occasion, only two. Either implies to me that you and I have a decision to make. God is not saying, now I'm going to have you to be this kind of tree. I'm going to have you wear this name, and I'm going to have you to act in this way. No. God says either. He says, Rodney, you got a choice. You got some decisions to make. You can have this name or that name. You can act this way or that way. You can have this type of heart or you can have that type of heart. You can speak with these types of words or you can speak with those types of words. Either. Either this or that. The choice is yours. And here are the options. Either make the tree good and therefore its fruit good, or the other option is to make the tree bad and its fruit bad, for the tree and the fruit are inseparable. That is, they are known by each other. It's a simple agricultural principle. You walk out in the yard and you find pears laying on the tree, and you don't have to look up to know that above you there is a pear tree. You walk out in the yard and you find apples lying in the yard. You don't have to look up. You don't have to know what kind of bark it is. You don't have to recognize the leaves. You know that is an apple tree. The fruit and the tree are inseparable. Whatever kind of tree it is, that is the type of fruit that it will bear. And there's only two options. It can either be a good tree that will by nature produce good fruit, or it will be a bad tree that will by nature produce rotten fruit. That's your choices. You get to decide, what type of tree will I be? You see, as we live in this world and as we interact with people and as we influence others and as we have communication and as we build relationships, we are constantly inviting. What are we inviting people to? We are constantly impacting and influencing. It amazes me how that in a basket of fruit, you let one pear go bad and you better get the rest of them out of the basket. Because it isn't going to be long until that one will spoil the entire basket, it seems. We are inviting, we are influencing as we live life. We are impacting people. And if it is the case that we are a bad tree producing bad fruit, then we are helping others in a bad way. You see, when you put garbage in, you will only get garbage out. When you decide, Jesus says, either make the tree. The word for make there is to come to be known as. In other words, it's not so much what you are doing, like we think of it as, I'm going to go make something, but rather what you become known by, or how you become considered. So you make yourself to be considered either or. In other words, you help your life to become known as. That's the idea of to make. As the tree grows, as it blooms, as it produces, life will tell the story. It'll tell your story. And it'll either be good or bad, depending on the choices that you and I make. What type of tree will I be? In Matthew chapter 12 and verse 34, Jesus, He says, you offspring of, you brood of vipers, you generation of evil, malicious, hard, cold-hearted people. He's talking to the Pharisees here, right? He's calling them what they are. And He says, you descendants of evil, and now you are just a bunch of vipers yourselves. Just a bunch of venomous, death-seeking. How in the world can you speak good when you're evil? For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. How can you, being evil, speak good? And the answer is you can't. You can't. You see, whatever is on the inside will bear itself out externally eventually. How can you claim and speak that which is good when on the inside you are rotten? How can a tree produce good fruit when in fact the inner core of it is rotten? And the answer you well know. It don't. As a matter of fact, it eventually breaks down. As a matter of fact, it eventually dies. As a matter of fact, eventually it becomes good for nothing but a campfire. Not to produce fruit, but to be thrown into the fire to be burned. It's rotten. It's dead. It's decaying. It's evil on the inside. And that inward rottenness eventually exposes itself. Have you ever had a tree in your yard? And you look out there and you think, wow, what a pretty tree. And limb by limb, little by little. And then 10 years from now, you look up and it is just a rotten, dead hull. And you ask yourself, what happened to that tree? The same thing that happens to a lot of people's spiritual lives. They are dying one limb at a time on the inside. And before long, all you have is a rotten hull of a spiritual person. I'm begging you. Change your actions. Keep the name. Change your actions. What kind of tree will you be? It can't be evil on the inside and be good on the outside. That's a paradigm that does not match up. There is no equality there. If it's rotten on the inside, it will in fact be rotten on the outside because, as Jesus says, it is out of the abundance of the heart. It is out of the overflow. It is out of the reservoir. It is out of the flowing over that the heart speaks. When you find yourself in a difficult situation, when you find yourself in a stressful situation, when you find yourself in an unfair situation, how do you act? What does your heart say? What comes out? What are your actions? What are your thoughts? What are your statements that are made? Could I suggest to you that's who you really are? Because that's the abundance. That's the overflow. That's the natural heart that is in your core. And if it's not good, it needs some changing. Jesus is inviting us to come unto Him so that we might take His yoke upon us. He's inviting the Pharisees, you brood of vipers. Change your actions. You're not the right kind of tree. What kind of tree will you be? For out of the abundance of the heart. Keep your heart with all diligence, Proverbs 4 and verse 23. Proverbs 23 and verse 7, as a man thinks in his heart. So easy. What's God looking at? Does God care about the externals? Oh, sure. Sure, God cares about what we say and how we act and what we do. But where does God look first and foremost? He knows that actions and words and thoughts come from the core. You know what God really wants? He wants your heart. He wants the core of you. Because He knows for out of it comes the good person. Verse 35. It is out of the good, and the word for treasure here has this idea of storehouse. It has this idea to the first century of a barn. It has this idea to you and I of maybe a pantry in our home. It is where we store our abundance of goods, if you will. It is where we store our surplus of crop. Maybe it's the deep freeze. It's where we have this reservoir that in moments of famine and in moments of difficulty and in moments of shortage and in moments of need, we go there as a backup, if you will. That is who we are. That describes what we're planning for and how we're preparing and how we're taking care of our lives and the provisions that we're making. And so there's this storehouse, there's this pantry, there's this cabinet, there's this barn where you are storing treasure. And Jesus says, out of the good storehouse, out of the godly storehouse, out of the good treasure. The word also carries with it the idea of priorities. It carries with it the idea of value, things that are valuable. And if the things that are our priority and valuable to us, then they're in the good storehouse. They're in the good treasure of our lives. And at any moment and at every moment, we have a pantry of good in our lives that we can go and pull from in order to do good. But the flip side of that coin, if you store in your treasure basket, if you store in your lock or in your safe at your house bad treasures, if your pantry is filled with rotten and moldy and out-of-date stuff, if it's bad stuff in there, then when you go to pull from the storehouse, when you go to pull from the treasure of your life, you know what you'll pull? You'll pull out-of-date, moldy, rotten, crummy, good-for-nothing values and priorities. And Jesus says very clearly, for the evil person out of the evil storehouse, verse 35, brings forth evil. It's a simple concept that if you and I fill our lives, and if you and I prioritize, and if you and I conduct ourselves, and if you and I prepare and plan in a godly, righteous way, then we will constantly be acting and living and conducting ourselves after that manner. But if we fill our lives with the garbage of the earth, if we fill our lives with the lies of Satan, if we fill our lives with the deceitful pleasures of sin and the temporary, passing nature of sin, then our conduct and our behavior, our tree, will be corrupt, and our fruit will be rotten. For I tell you, verse 36, there's coming a day of judgment. There's coming a day of judgment. That's not a new revelation to you, is it? It's coming a day of judgment, at which time you will give an account for every careless, some translations say idle word you speak. And we come to that and we say, you need to watch what you say. And we come to this verse and we say, hey, you know what? I believe that was an idle word. Or we get into this shooting the breeze kind of thing, and we begin to, if we don't like what's being said, I think that's, you better be careful of that idle talk. The word literally means here harmful. The word literally means useless. In other words, it's things that ought not to be said because they're either untrue or they're hurtful to someone. Be they true, they're still hurtful, and so they just don't need to be said. Well, Mama always said, if you couldn't say something good, just keep your mouth shut, right? You will not give an account for a word that you do not say. Is that clear enough? But you will give an account for every word that you do say. And so will I. So choose your words wisely. Choose them carefully. Watch the heart. Protect the heart. Keep the tree at its core, what it ought to be. So that out here on these branches, in the storms, in the winds, in the rains, in the hot heat of the summer, in the dry days of drought, these branches can act and conduct themselves and hold themselves together in a godly way. Because Jesus says, I tell you, you will give an account on that day. Everything, the wise man says in the book of Ecclesiastes, everything will be brought into judgment. Even the secret things, Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 14, whether they be good or whether they be evil. Be advised. A day of reckoning is coming, and everything you say will be brought into judgment. Make sure what you say you are ready to give an account for. For by your words, verse 37, and I believe words here in the context, and I believe words here in the meaning of the word, has much more than just what you say, but how you live. For by your words, remember that very often, words is a manner of conduct. It's a way of life. The King James Version uses the word conversation. By your conversation, that is how you live. You will either be, and here's you another choice. You'll either be justified, as the Winklers put it from their commentary on the book of Romans, just as if you never sinned. Justified. Or you'll be condemned. For by your words. Jesus says in John 12 and verse 48, He that rejects me and my words has a judge that will judge him on the last day. My words will judge him. So watch this. Coming into Judgment Day are the words of Jesus. Are you ready? Are you ready for the words and the commandments of Jesus to come into Judgment Day and to judge your soul for all eternity? Are you listening to Him? It's all red in that whole context there. Matthew 12, 33 to 37, all red letters. Are you listening to Him? It says, my word's going to judge you on the last day. In His words, according to Matthew 12 and verse 37, He says, your words are going to judge you. My words are going to judge me. So as Judgment Day comes to be, whenever that is, the words of Jesus will come into play. The books will be opened, and I will give an account for how well I answered and obeyed the words of Jesus. Coming into Judgment Day will be the words of my life. That is my conversation. That is how I conducted myself. That is my behavior. And God will ask of me, Rodney, what kind of tree did you decide to be? Was it a good tree that produced good fruit out of the good storehouse of a good heart? Or was it a bad tree that produced bad out of the bad storehouse of an evil heart? Here's your choices. It's simple. It's simple to hear, simple to process, yet it is very difficult to live up to. Sir, what is your name? God, I'm a Christian. Rodney, what is your name? Well, God, I'm a Christian. Rodney, one more time. What is your name? God, I'm a Christian. If God is saying to you right now, you either need to change your name or your actions, then the opportunity is yours. As together we stand and sing.